Hi everyone, welcome to Stack Mastery. My name is Amir and this is the second episode of designing ASP.NET Web API. In the previous video only we talked about the API and what is the API, and also we created our first ASP.NET Web API project. Then I gave some information about each of these sections in the solution, about program.cs file, about Swagger, and then we wrote our first API. As I said before, for designing API in ASP.NET Web API framework, we have two main approach. One is through MVC architecture, and the other one is through minimal API. So we use MVC architecture for designing our API. But I want to give a little information about MVC initially. So what is MVC? MVC is an architectural software pattern that we can use for implementing user interface. And it has some advantages like separation of concerns, improving testability, reusability, and so on. But something that's really important to know about MVC is that MVC is not a full application architecture. So, for instance, when we are designing a backend system, when we have a full application architecture like those n-layer architecture, like domain-centric architecture, so the architecture that we choose for designing our system depend on the context, so anything but it can be. So in those cases, MVC only serve as presentation layer. So MVC is only one layer of that architecture, and in most of the cases we put it in top of our architecture, as a presentation layer. The MVC itself has three parts: the model, view, and controller. So in classic MVC, this model, view, and controller has different definition. But when we are designing an API here, when we are actually using the MVC only as a presentation layer in top of our full architecture, this definition is a little different. For instance, in classic MVC, the model was responsible for representing application data, also containing business logic. But here it's not like this. Here mostly it reduced to only DTOs, or data transfer objects, to carry the data between the controller and the views, nothing more, because we put those business logics in for instance our domain entities. And here also, when we talk about views, because we don't have that much representing the application view, and we don't display that much things when we are designing the API, the view also have a different meaning here. So view only here is the representation of our data. For instance, how we are showing our data, or how we are delivering the data to the consumer of our API. For instance, it is through JSON format, or it is through XML format, or any other format that we are using for delivering our data. And the controller here only handles the interaction between these views and the models. Okay, so we have some, for instance, views that we want to show some data, to send some data to the consumer of the API. And also we have some models, which are those DTOs, those data transfer objects. So controller only acts as an interaction between these two. So here we create our first controller, and but I want to give some information about this now. So here we have category controller. So this name that we choose, category controller. So the controller is a part of a standard of MVC. So any controller that you create should finish with controller. So the name of the category, controller. Here we are inheriting a controller base. So controller base contains basically the basic functionality that a controller need, like access to model state, the current user, and common method for returning responses. Also, but we have other options. For instance, instead of using controller base, we can inherit from controller too. Basically, controller and controller base are close together. Controller has inherit controller base, but it also adds some extra things. Some extra things, for instance, some additional helper methods to use when returning views. But here, because we are not returning any view, so we don't need controller, and controller base is a better option where we are designing, APIs. And here also this ASP, API controller attribute that we use also is not strictly required to build an API, but it enables some essential API specific features such as atomic model validation, improved parameter building, and standard error response. So making it a best practice for ASP.NET Core Web API. And through this route attribute, we specify the address that this controller can accessing. So here we said API /category. So this is the address that this controller can get access in. Also, instead of the category that we wrote here, we can only have this one, the controller. So this also meaning the same. So meaning this part, the category. For instance, when you have many different controllers, if you put this on top of them, it's going to be API /category, API /food, if the name of the controller be food. And these get used in a routing process. So, but it's what is routing? So routing is a process that matches a request URI to an action on a controller. So when we send an HTTP request, MVC framework first parses the URI, also check its HTTP method, and then tries to map it to an action on a controller. So in modern ASP.NET Core, the preferred and standard approach for doing this is through actually endpoint routing. And endpoint also is a final executable unit that can handle requests. For instance, here, this action is an endpoint. So an action on a controller is an endpoint. Also, a minimal API handler is an endpoint. So when a request arrives, the MVC framework finally match the URL to an HTTP method and determine whether it should go to a controller action or a minimal API handler. And after that, when the decisions was made, ASP.NET Core execute the selected endpoint to handle the request. So this is something that we call it endpoint routing. And one important also thing that we should know is this one. But let's create actually some models for our API. So here I want to create a model folder. Through this. I believe I wrote wrong. Let me rename this models. Okay. So here we are trying to return a list of categories, but instead of this, let's create a category model. So I want to create a category DTO. And here we want to have a int an ID. Then also I want to have an string property with the name. It's gonna carry the name of our controller. Also, I want to create a service folder here. Like services, then add one category service. So here what we're gonna do, I want to create a list of actually of our category DTO to use it here. So for instance, I want to have a property. I want to name it for instance, I don't know, it's gonna be a list of category DTO, and its name, it's gonna be, for instance, I don't know, data source. Let's name it data source now. Then we will get back and rename if it wasn't a good name. So data source, and in the constructor of this class, I want to fill this list. So here it's gonna be new like this. Here I want to have many different. For instance, we can have a category DTO with ID equal to 1 and name equal to, for instance, pizza. And let's copy this one. Then ID 2 for pasta. ID 3 maybe for burgers. Also, for instance, we can have another category for maybe drinks. Like category 4. And then I want to have another static category service object. I want to put it here, and I want to name it for instance current maybe. Yeah. Name this like this. Okay. Then let's go to our controller. So here, instead of returning this list, let's get access to that category service. So I'm gonna write category service dot current dot data source. So I want to return this one instead of that ready data that we had. So okay, let's run the application to see this data is visible in the front or not. Then we will continue with other things. Okay, now the application is almost ready. Okay, let's open this Swagger to see what we have here. Try it out, execute. Okay, so now we can see the results actually is here. So okay, but let's now talk a little more about this action. So here sorry, we have HTTP method. So this HTTP method says what actually this action is responsible for. For instance, when we have an action which is responsible for returning some data to users, we can flag it as an HTTP GET method, HTTP method. Also, we have other one. For instance, we can have HTTP delete. When we have an endpoint which is responsible for deleting something, we can have HTTP put. We can have HTTP put is for update. We can have HTTP post. So for different purposes, we can have different HTTP methods that we will talk about all of them very soon in this episode. So here, when we write HTTP GET, it means that this endpoint is responsible for returning actually something to user. But something else that here, so far we have used Swagger for testing our API, but Swagger is not that much great thing for testing our APIs. For instance, when we want to customize some requests to our API, it's better to use of something else. So here for this episode and for this course, actually throughout the course, we're gonna use the Postman application. So the Postman give us this opportunity to test our actually APIs and have many custom API things. For instance, how are we gonna use this? So if we run our API as before, we can see the address of our API, address that our API is run is here. So if we take this and we put it here, then here we can create some requests. So here was the category. Yeah? Okay, and if we run this, so we get the data also here. Also here, if you see, we are getting 200, okay, which is the status code. So the status code also is something really important. So the status code actually is the primary mechanism that an API consumer, for instance, such as a client-side web application, can inspect to determine determine that an API consumer can determine whether a request was successful or that request failed. So if also the request fails, this status code also can indicate whether the problem originated from the consumer or from the API itself. Where was the problem? So it says a lot of things about the response that we are sending to our client. For instance, let's create another endpoint here. I want to write action result. In this endpoint, I want to only also we can change this to category DTO, not a string anymore, because now we are returning a list of category DTO. So here we want to only send one category DTO, not more, only one. And I want to name it get, for instance, by ID. And here we will get the ID of users, int ID. And when we got the ID, we return OK. And in the OK, we return this category services.current.data source.first or default ID was equal to this one. Okay. Also, this is an HTTP GET. So let's also decorate this with HTTP GET. So if I run this, what do you think will happen? So let's try it. Let's stop. And another time, let's try our API. Let's see what will happen. So now if we call this another time, okay, now we see one problem happen. He says the request matched multiple endpoints. So as I said, when a HTTP request sends and came to our API, so the routing system tries to match that URI to one executable unit, to one endpoint. So there shouldn't be any ambiguous between the endpoints. So here we said this is the address of this controller is an API controller, and after this it's gonna be through these things. So when we have two HTTP GET method like as the same, so how it gonna separate between these two? It's not possible. So what happened in this case? We got an error. So here what we should do, so here when for instance we want to only get one category, not the whole list, so what we can do, we can add also the ID after this. So it's gonna be API /category /1 is gonna be the ID. But here we didn't add the ID here. So only thing we should do is here we can say that in this HTTP GET actually we are getting something with the name ID, yeah, which we didn't used to get it in which we are not getting it in other ones. So here we are getting an ID in this HTTP GET and this ID can separate it from the the another one. So let's try it another time. So let's go to Postman. Once the API is ready to test. Okay, and if we send, let's do the previous one. So if we do this, okay, now we are getting the correct results. And if we go for the one, for instance, what we get, 4004 not found. Okay, let's see what's the problem now. I believe we should have this here. Yeah, now it should fix. Sometimes still after a couple of years programming I forget to put some simple things. So okay, let's test now. Okay, now we are getting the exactly same the requested item. So we have in our list of data here we have 1, 2, 3 and 4. Let's give a 5, see what happened. Okay, we are getting nothing and we are getting a 204 not content. So these 204 not content, as you guys can see, that is a green, is a okay response, mean that the request has handled and processed correctly, but actually we are getting nothing. So how this is correct when we haven't got something? So this shows that we didn't correctly respond to this process, to this request. So here we will see the importance of a status code, because the status codes also should specify actual situation that happened in our server. So what we can do, so here when we are responding with OK, this means that the process has processed, the request has processed correctly. But let's change it to explain what I mean here. So I want to take from here, I want to has var result equal to this one, and then here we can check either this is result is null or not. So if it was null, so what we should return, we can return not found, because we didn't found anything. So instead of returning the OK, we will return a not found. But if we found something, so here we can return the result. Okay. So what's happening here? So this helper method, all of them are in ControllerBase, and we have many different actually helper method in our ControllerBase. So if we go to definition, we can see many different of these methods here. I don't know for many different scenario, we have different one. We can see the okay, we have no content, we have many different. So the ASP.NET contain a set of built-in helper methods and controller base that all of them also create action result response, like okay, as I show you, bad request, not found, and all of these methods can be used in different scenario to help users understand what actually is happening on the server. So here the not found is a better maybe response. So now if we do this, we get a 404 not found. Now the user can understand its request wasn't successful and he couldn't fetch something from our API. So now we see how much important this is this status code. Okay, but if something happened, if an error happened, in that case what will happen? So here also we can put this in a try catch block. We can put it like this. Let me clean here a little. Okay, what we can do here. So here we can only return a status code, and in the status code we can say what's the problem. So something about the status codes, that status codes are in different level. So we have a status code in 100 level, which is informational status code. For instance, when you want to share some information with your client, with your consumer, you can use these levels. It's not that much usable in actually designing APIs. We have a 200, which are 200 level are for okay requests. So when the request was successful, we send the 200. We have 400, which is for error. For instance, when something failed, we can use the 400. Also 500 is for the internal server error. So if something happened in the server, so 500, we threw 500, but we threw 400 level for client's mistake. For instance, in this case, when the users was requesting for a resource that we don't have it, we are returning 404, which shows the user that the consumer of the user done something wrong because request something that we don't have it. But if the data will be already here, but there be a problem in our system, so in that case, we can use 500 level status code to show something happening in our side, not in consumer side. So here we can say, I don't know, we want to send, for instance, a 500 error, and here we can say, I don't know, for instance, anything we can mention. We as my experience, we shouldn't expose this actually error to the users, because we shouldn't let the consumer know what is happening behind. Instead of this, we can log this somewhere, but we should return something prepared for the user. For instance, we can say something happened wrong in our system, for instance. So this is something that we can throw. So we don't need this now here. Okay. So through these, we can say that we are returning something here. So also this is for get all. So now if we check, it's not gonna be that much different in the UI. So let's go for actually also having another endpoint for creating something, maybe adding something to a category. So here also we can have another one, public action result. So in this case, what we gonna return to user? So it's a created. So what we gonna return? Simply nothing. We're not gonna return anything to user. So we don't need to this, only an action result. So it's gonna be a create, for instance, category. And this one is not HTTP GET anymore. Instead of HTTP GET, here we have HTTP POST, because user should send some data to us, and we should use that data for creating a category in our system. And here we can accept that category. So here we can use this category DTO. But a better approach is to have a separate DTO or data transfer object for getting the request from user. Why? Because when user want to send some data to us for creating the category, the user not gonna send the ID, because the ID get specified by our system. User only need to send the name. So here we can have another class, category create, for instance, DTO. For instance, we can have category create DTO, and here the only thing it need to have is a string name, and we can use this one in our controller as a category. Okay, now we can add this to our list. So here we have this list, so I can get here and add to this list this category, but it's not gonna accept. Yeah, I know, because it's the list of the category. So here we create a list of these. So the name of the name will be equal to category dot name, but about ID we only should find the maximum that we have already and add one to it. So I will also use again this one here to get the max ID, and I will increase it by 1 to use it as an ID for a new thing. And finally what we should return, do you think? We should return an OK response or something else? No, we don't should return an OK response. In this case, we should return a no content. So this means that the request processed successfully, but we don't have anything to share with you, because you request for creating something and that thing has created already. Okay. And this is HTTP post. So because you guys see there is no any input data has mentioned here in this place, but still the user can call this, and it's not going to be any ambiguous between this and the other ones, because the HTTP method now is different. So the routing system match two things. One is the URI and one is the HTTP method. So if there be two endpoints with the same URI, but if their HTTP method be different, so routing matching can distinguish between these two. So now if we run the system again, we can check this one too. Okay, we don't need this. Let's go to Postman, or also we can do it here, no difference. So here also, as you guys see, this one has added. So if here we can, to the name we can say something. So we have pasta, we have burgers, we have pizza, and also the drinks, but we can have something extra here. I don't know, we can have, for instance, the kebab maybe category, and then we execute. and we will get a 204, which means that the request was successfully. And let's say this, let's check this, let's get the whole list to see that it has added to our list or not, and we can say yes, the 5 also has added, which is kebab. So this means that our endpoints has worked out properly. Also, always try to put your code in these blocks, this try-catch block, to don't expose anything by wrong to user side, to consumer side. Don't expose any extra information about your backend, because this is the place sometimes some malicious users, some hackers can use of this information for attacking to your systems. Okay, now we have like this. So but how now we can have one another endpoint for deleting something in the our API? So only thing I want to do for this, also I want to add something public action result. In this one, delete the category. So for deleting only, we need to accept an ID. Then what we should do, we should check if we found that one, if the result was founded. So what we do in this list, we will remove, like 1. We will remove that result, and then again return no content, because there is nothing to share with the users in this case. Okay, and this should decorate with HTTP delete. So let's do another for update and then check both together. So update also is similar somehow to this, but with some differences. So here, let me add this. So here, instead of HTTP post, we can have HTTP put for update. And either we should use this, probably no. So because this should also have its specific actually DTO, so I will create another DTO with the name category update DTO, and in this one also I want to put only the property, which is the name that we have for updating, because the only field that users can update is name, nothing more. It can't update the ID, obviously. So we have only the name here. So here, instead of this create DTO, we should use update DTO, and here also we will change the name to update category. So, and we get this one. Also, it should give us the ID. So it should give us the, category ID. And like this get that we create, so we should have also this field that we are trying to get in the URL. So this one, the category ID, should also be here. So it can be like this now. So we get the ID, also in the request body we get the data that they want to update. So what we can do here, first we should look to find the object that we want to update here. based on this one. If we didn't found, so not found. If we found it, the only thing that we should do is to make the results that name equal to this category, this one, name, and then returning no content. So let's now check both of them at the same time. The delete one, also the update, these last two endpoints that we add. Okay, let's refresh this one. So now you guys can see we have now one for delete, also one for update. So we add a last one, which was the so here if we execute this, so we have four. We have pizza, pasta, burgers, and drinks. Let's delete the drink, which is with the ID 4. So if I give the 4 here and execute this, we will get a 204 not content. If we get this list request the whole list another time, we can see now the last one has removed. So and we have one with the ID 1, which is the pizza. Let's change its name to pizza 1 only. So the ID 1, its name should be pizza 1 instead of it. Execute. Yes, so it's complete. If we get the whole list another time, we should see the name has changed. So now we have the CRUD, the create, update, delete, and return and fetch all the actually endpoints that we need for the CRUD operation, and we've done all of them correctly here. But another thing, which is going to be the last thing in this episode, is that as you guys saw so far, when for instance here, let's say when here we request some the whole list, you guys saw that the result is in JSON, but sometimes maybe our consumer need another type. Maybe it doesn't need maybe it needs to get the data in another format like XML. How it can say? So what he can do in the headers section, we have something accept header. So in accept header, he can say in which format he prefer to get the response from our API. So here, for instance, we can have application JSON is something that we are using now, but maybe you want to request for XML, which can happen. So application XML, yeah. So also it should be here, yeah. No, this one. Only this one. Okay. So now let's send what's happened. Again, it's getting the JSON. However, this requested for XML, but the result still is JSON. What's the reason? The reason is that we haven't configured the XML yet in our API. So let's go and do this also. So what we need to do, if we go here in the program that says when we are adding the controller, so here we can have the options. Through this option, we can get access to something that they call it XML or HTTP not acceptable. So if we through this one, if we through the return HTTP not acceptable, it only respond to those application, to those formats that already has configured. So if that format wasn't configured yet here, so it's not gonna respond correctly to them. So let's try this first. Let's send another request to our API and ask for XML to see what is gonna happen. So it is up here. Let's do this. Yes, you guys can see it say 406 not acceptable. So our API didn't accept this request because this request is requesting for XML, but we are only responding by JSON. But how we can respond by XML? Also, this is possible. Yes. The only thing here, if we add XML, this one, yeah, if we add add XML data, contract serialization format also to our controller, then our controller also be capable, to providing the XML response too. In most of the cases, JSON is something that mostly is using, but in some scenarios also XML is really great thing. So now we will try this. Okay, now we will see the response also is correctly delivering to consumer in XML format. So if the user don't say anything here, what happens? So in that case, our API respond by the default setting, which is JSON. So if we remove this and send again, we should get in JSON format again. You guys can see, but also this is configurable. So we can configure the orders of the APIs of the formats in our site. So thank you guys for watching this episode, and in the next episode I will share more in-depth information about designing ASP.NET Web API. Have a good day, guys, and subscribe the channel if it was something useful information for you guys. Thank you. Bye.